מה טובו אוהליך יעקב משכנותיך ישראל מה טובו אוהליך יעקב משכנותיך ישראל משכנותיך ישראל.
We're gathered together this night, embraced by the peace of our surroundings, away from the clamor and glare of the world, away from its confusions and terrors, grateful for the opportunity to meditate upon the year that is gone and to pray for the year to come. We face not only a new year, but a changing world where new knowledge and continual upheavals threaten all life everywhere. Our lives are burdened with failure and wrongdoing. Our hearts are torn by jealousy and hates. Prejudice confuses our thoughts. Sin distorts our lives. We are ridden by fear, tormented by frustrations, by loneliness, and by endless desires. Too often, straying like shepherdless sheep, we seek direction on our way.
Let us now turn to page 3. שיר המעלות ממעמקים קראתיך אדוני. Be attentive to my prayers, to my sigh of supplication. עם עוונות תשמורי אדוני מי יעמוד. But forgiveness is yours, therefore we revere you. קיוויתי אדוני קיוותה נפשי ולהתברך חלתי. I wait for Adonai more eagerly than watchmen wait for the dawn. יחל ישראל אל אדוני, כי מאדוני חסד וערבי מופדות. Abundant is Adonai's power to redeem. May he redeem the people Israel from all sin. Bottom of page 3.
כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, גשר צר מאוד, גשר צר מאוד, וכל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, גשר צר מאוד. והעיקר לא לפחד, לא לפחד כלל, והעיקר לא לפחד כלל, והעיקר לא לפחד, לא לפחד כלל, והעיקר לא לפחד כלל. כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, גשר צר מאוד, גשר צר מאוד. כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, גשר צר מאוד.
Let us continue playing Ashrei on page 4.
אשרי יושבי ביתך עוד יהללו סלה. אשרי העם שככה לו, אשרי העם שאדוני אלוהיו. תהילה לדוד, הרוממך אלוהי המלך, ועבר שמך לכל עולם ועד.
בכל אמרת
תהילה ידבר פי ויברך בשר שלם ואנחנו נברך יה מעתה ועד עולם, הללויה.
Chatzi Kaddish, page 5.
יתגדל ויתקדש מרבה
Amen.
עלמא דברה קירותי ואמליק מלכותי בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל בגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ולעלמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר וירומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו לעילמים. כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמא ואמרו אמן.
Bottom of page 5.
אשא עיני אל ההרים מאין יבוא עזרי. אשא עיני אל ההרים מאין יבוא עזרי. עזרי מעם אדוני עושה שמיים וארץ. עזרי מעם אדוני עושה שמיים וארץ. אשא עיני אל ההרים מאין יבוא עזרי. אשא עיני אל ההרים מאין יבוא עזרי.
We continue now in English with Lecha Adonai Tzedakah, page 6.
Righteousness is yours, O Lord, shamefaced embarrassment ours. What can we say to you? How can we word our defense? We shall examine our ways, probe our needs, and return to you, for you welcome the ones who return to you. We possess neither good deeds nor virtue. We come as paupers to knock at your door. We knock at your door, merciful God. Please do not turn us away empty-handed. Turn us not away unanswered, O Lord, for you, O King, do listen to prayer.
We turn now to page 7, the bottom part of the page. Aneshama Lach.
הנשמה לך והגוף פה לך, חוצה חוצה על המלאך. הנשמה לך והגוף פה לך, חוצה חוצה על המלאך. הנשמה לך והגוף פה לך, חוסה חוסה על המלאך. הנשמה לך והגוף פה לך, חוסה חוסה Al Amalah.
The soul is yours, the body is your creation. Lord, have compassion upon your handiwork. The soul is yours, the body is yours. Deal with us according to your name. We come before you relying on your name. According to your glorious name, help us. Your name is gracious, compassionate God. Forgive then our sin, though it is great.
We continue on page 8. Father, great and holy Father of all mankind, you create your child, the world, every instant. If for an instant you withdrew the gift of your creation, emptiness would replace it. But you shower your children with blessing every moment. Once again, the morning stars appear, singing a song of love to you. Once again, the sun bursts forth, singing a song of light to you. Once again, angels sing of holiness to you. Once again, souls sing of yearning to you. And once again, grass sings of longing to you. Once again, birds sing a song of joy to you. Once again, orphaned nestlings sing of loneliness to you. And once again, a brook whispers its prayer. Once again, the afflicted pours out his complaint to you. Once again, his soul prayer splits your heavens. Once again, he trembles in awe of your glory. And once again, he hopefully awaits you. One ray of your light, and I am immersed in light. One word from you, and I am reborn. One hint of your eternal presence, and I am refreshed with the dew of youth. For you create everything anew. Father, please create me, your child, anew. Breathe into me your spirit, that I may begin a new life.
Page 9.
Adonai, Adonai, Rachum v'chanun, Herech apayim v'rav chesed v'emet, Notzer chesed lalafim, Nosei avon v'fesha, V'chata v'nakeh, V'salakta lavoneinu, Unchaltatenu, unchaltanu. Slach lanu avinu ki chatanu. Mechalanu malkeinu ki fashanu. Ki ata Adonai tov v'salach. Ki ata Adonai tov v'salach. V'rav chesed lechol korecha. V'rav chesed lechol korecha.
Let us now turn to page 11 for Shema Koleinu.
Shema Koleinu, Adonai Eloheinu, Kus v'rachem aleinu, v'kabeh b'rachamim uv'ratzon, et tefilateinu. Hashiveinu Adonai lecha v'nashuva, Kadesh amenu kekedem. Amarenu hazin Adonai b'nahagigeinu. Yul ratzon amrepinu v'hegyon livenu lefanecha. Adonai tzurenu v'goaleinu. Shema goleinu. Adonai Eloheinu. Chus v'rachem aleinu, v'kabeh b'rachamim uv'ratzon, et tefilateinu. Al tashlichenu mefanecha, v'ruach kodshecha el tikach mimenu. Shema koleinu. Adonai Eloheinu, Kus v'rachem aleinu, v'kabeh b'rachamim uv'ratzon, et tefilateinu. תשליכנו לעת זקנה, כי לא כוחנו את עזבנו. שמע קולנו, אדוני אלוהינו, חוס ורחם עלינו, וקבל ברחמים וברצון את תפילתנו.
We turn now to page 12.
What can we say to you? What can we tell you? You know all things, secret and revealed. You always forgive transgressions. Hear the cry of our prayer. Pass over the transgressions of a people who turn away from transgression. Blot out our sins from your sight.
ועל כולם אלוהי סליחות, סלח לנו מחלנו, כפר לנו. ועל כולם אלוהי סליחות, סלח לנו מחלנו, סלח לנו מחלנו, כפר לנו.
We continue with the vidui on page 13.
אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, תבוא לפניך תפילתנו, ואל תתעלם מתחינתנו, שאין אנחנו עזב מינים, וכשאורך לומר לפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, צדיקים אנחנו ולא חטאנו, אבל אנחנו ואבותינו חטאנו. Ay 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 da 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 ya da 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 ay 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 ya da 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 ya da 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 Ashamnu Baganu Gazalnu
Gazalu.
Nu dofi nine 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 Hevinu Vehirshanu Zadnu Chamasnu Tefalnu Sheker Nine 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 ya nine 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 ya nine 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 Yaznura Kizavnu Latsnu Maranu Niatsnu Sararnu Avinu Pashanu Tsararnu Kishinu Oref Ay 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 ya da 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 ya da 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 Rashanu Ichanu Tainu Titanu Sa'arnu mitzvotecha u'mishpatecha chatovim velo shava lanu ve'ata tzadik al kol haba aleinu ki emet asita ve'anaknu hirshanu.
We now turn to page 14. משנה לאברהם אבינו וירא מוריה, הוא יעננו. משנה ליצחק בנו כשנעקד על גבי המזבח, הוא יעננו. משנה ליעקב בבית אל, הוא יעננו. משנה ליוסף בבית האסורים, הוא יעננו. משנה לאבותינו על ים סוף, הוא יעננו. משנה למשה בחורב, הוא יעננו. משנה לאהרון במתנה, הוא יעננו. משנה לפנחס בקומו מתוך העדה, הוא יעננו. משנה ליהושע בגלגל, הוא יעננו. משנה ושמואל במצפה, הוא יעננו. משנה לדוד ושלמה בנו בירושלים, הוא יעננו. משנה לאליהו בהר הכרמל, הוא יעננו. משנה לאלישע ביריחו, הוא יעננו. משנה ליונה במעי הדגה, הוא יעננו. משנה לחזקיהו בחלב, הוא יעננו. משנה לחנניה, מישאל ועזריה בתוך כבשן האש, הוא יעננו. משנה לדניאל בגוב אריות, הוא יעננו. משנה למרדכי ואסתר ושושן אבירה, הוא יעננו. משנה לעזרא בגולה, הוא יעננו. משנה לכל הצדיקים והחסידים והתמימים והישרים, הוא יעננו. We turn now to page 16 for Shomer Israel. DJ, you have to unmute yourself. This is now the Methuselah Church officially.
Shomer, Shomer Israel, Shemo She'erit Yisrael. Shomer, Shomer Israel, Shemo She'erit Yisrael. Ve'al Yovad Yisrael, Ve'al Yovad Yisrael, Ha'omrim Shema Yisrael. Shomer, Shomer Goy Echad, Shemo She'erit Am Echad. Shomer, Shomer Goy Echad, Shemo She'erit Am Echad. Ve'al Yovad Goy Echad, Ve'al Yovad Goy Echad Ham Yachadim. Shimcha Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Shomer, Shomer Goy Kadosh, Shemo She'erit Am Kadosh. Shomer, Shomer Goy Kadosh, Shomer She'erit Am Kadosh. Ve'al Yovad Goy Kadosh, Ve'al Yovad Goy Kadosh Ham Yashim. V'shashrosh Kedusha Lekadosh. Avinu Malkeinu, Chanenu V'anenu. Avinu Malkeinu, Chanenu V'anenu, Ki ein banu ma'asim. Asei manu, Sedaga v'chesed. Asei manu tzedaka v'chesed ve'hoshienu. Avinu Malkeinu, Chanenu V'anenu. Avinu Malkeinu, Chanenu V'anenu, Ki ein banu ma'asim.
Mizmor LeDavid. Adonai, mi yagor bo halecha, mi yishkon bahar kodshecha. Holech tamim ufoel tzedek v'dover emet bilvavo. Lo ragel al lushono, lo asa l'reihu ra'a v'cherpa lo nasa al krovo. Nivze beinav nim'as, yet yirei Adonai yichaved nishma lahara v'lo yamor. Kaspo lo natan v'neshech, v'shochad al naki lo lakach. Ose ele lo yimot leolam.
Kaddish Shalem, bottom of page 17.
Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah be'alma divra kirute ve'amlik malchute v'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chaye dechol beit Yisrael b'agala uv'izman kariv ve'himeru amen. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בוריחו והילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן ועלמה והימרו אמן. תתקבל צלות ההון ובאותחון דכל ישראל קודם אבוהון דבי שמיה והימרו אמן. יהי שלום הרבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל והימרו אמן אמן. עושה שלום במברומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל והימרו Amen.
We're going to conclude our service with Igdal and with the shofar blowing after Igdal, and then we'll proceed to our special program, page 19.
יגדל אלוהים חי וישתבח נמצא ואין את אל מציאותו אחד ואין יחיל כייחודו נעלם וגם אין סוף לאחדותו אין לו דמות הגוף ואינו גוף לא נערוך אליו קדושתו קדמון לכל דבר אשר נברא ראשון ואין ראשית לראשיתו הינו אדון עולם וכל נוצר יורה גדולתו ומלכותו שפע נבואתו נתנו אל אנשי סגולתו ותפארתו לא קם בישראל כמו שעוד נביא ומביט את אמונתו תורת אמת נתן לעמו אל יד נביאו נאמן ביתו לא יחליף האל ולא יראו דתו לעולמים לזולתו צופה יודע סתרנו מביט לסוף דבר בקמתו גומל לאיש חסד כמפעלו נותן לרשע רע כרישתו נשלח לחץ העמים משיחנו לבדות מקחי קץ ישועתו מתים יחייאל ברוב חסדו ברוך הדעת שם תהילתו מתים יחייאל ברוב חסדו ברוך הדעת שם תהילתו.
Shana Tova, everyone. Shana Tova. Shkoyach, Rabbi Tetil.
Shkoyach, Shana Tova.
Let me just make sure that Kasim is here. I think, yeah, he's here. I'm going to actually, before I highlight him, I just want to do a brief introduction and explain a little bit of who he is without explaining too much because I want him to do that explanation. And just a little bit of the format we're going to follow. We're going to let him tell his story. And after that, if you guys have questions, I'm going to ask you to write them in the chat. And Rabbi Tektil, Rabbi Hudson, and myself will actually ask the questions. But first of all, I am so honored to have Kasim here tonight with us. I first heard him speak here in Las Vegas a couple of years ago, and I was absolutely shocked by his story. Not that I didn't hear stories like his before, but I was shocked by his story because Kasim is a very normal person. He's not the son of any diplomat or the son of any high-ranking Palestinian official or anything like that. He was just a normal Muslim kid growing up in the United Kingdom, and he his life was running the path of what many of those kids run the path. And somehow his life turned around in a miraculous way. And I'm going to let him tell you why. But one of the reasons that Rabbi Tekel and I asked him to speak tonight is because I believe this is a true story of Teshuvah. This is a true story of turning your life around. I don't know if you, Rabbi Tekel, would like to say a couple of words about it, or we just let Kasim go on.
No, I was to say that exact thing. I always look for, we have many examples within our own community of tshuva, of repentance. And I always find it interesting looking outside of our community to find examples of people who are doing that exact same thing, that tshuva, that repented. So I'm excited to have him as well.
So I'm going to highlight him right now. And Kasim, it's an honor to have you here. There you go. Okay. And let me just make sure you're unmuted, because I think you're muted. Okay, you're on mute. Yeah, you're muted now? I don't know.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, you're perfect. There you are. Thank you so much for being on. I am so grateful to you. Thank you.
No, at all. Thank you very much. I apologize for my slightly disheveled appearance. I did a 18-hour endurance event to memorialize 9/11. So I'm full of bruises, and so yeah, and I'm in a hotel lobby. So I apologize if the lighting isn't great. So yeah, I'm going to just kind of launch into my story, and then we can kind of really go from there. So my name's Kasim. I grew up in the UK, in a place called Nottingham, famous for Robin Hood. And my grandparents came to the UK from Pakistan, and it was a very conventional immigrant story. They came for the economic opportunities that the UK provided, et cetera, et cetera. And the neighborhood I grew up in, and I think this is very common for new immigrant communities wherever they are in the world, it was predominantly Pakistani and Muslim. And look, I would be the first one to say that there are issues with extremism and radicalism in Europe, especially in Muslim communities. That first generation of immigrant weren't extremist at all. They came to the UK with the hope of integrating, being part of British society, seeing their kids grow up as an integral part of British society. So it was a very different dynamic than what has developed. But that was the community I grew up in, predominantly Pakistani Muslim. And just to give you an idea of what the consequences, I guess, my grandparents passed away a few years ago, came to the UK in the 60s, and up until the day they passed away, they never learned to write or read in English and could speak very little. And, my granddad worked for a British company for 50, 60 years, but the community they lived in was so insular, they were able to not have to do those things. But while I said that it was an extreme it was not an extreme community, one of the challenges and issues which was strange looking back was this obsession and hatred of the Jews and Israel. We didn't know anyone Jewish. Pakistan has never had a significant Jewish population, but there was this constant obsession with the Jews. People would call somebody a Jew as an insult, or if Israel or the Jews were mentioned, because they were seen as interchangeable in my family, in my wider community. If they were mentioned in a news story, you'd hear comments such as, "You can't trust the Jews, they control America. You can't trust the Jews, they control the media." And look, I am not making any accusations, I'm not making any judgments, but if the Jewish people do control the media, you're doing a really bad job. I just want to throw that out there. No judgment. Who knows? And things like that. So that was kind of, I grew up with, just that was common. But it had a very toxic side to it. I mean, that is toxic in itself. But like my father would say repeatedly, Hitler was a great man. His one mistake was he didn't kill enough Jews. It's not a great message to be growing up around when you're 6 or 7 years old. And this is the thing. While on a intellectual level, you can look at that today, I can look at that today and go, the idea of somebody saying that the murder of 6 million Jews wasn't enough, or 6 million people, any group, wasn't enough, is abhorrent. When that message is continually repeated from a young age, you don't know anyone Jewish, you don't know anyone Israeli, to go, actually, they're just people like me. Those lies become reality. The idea that the Jews control the world, they become a reality. And it may sound strange, but it's what happens. You become a product of your environment, and then you surround yourself in an echo chamber of everything that validates that view. But for me personally, it wasn't a question of I grew up with these views and became a radical. I was growing up at a very challenging time for people from Muslim backgrounds. So Europe is very different from North America. I've lived in Canada for 5 years, and now the United States for 2 years, I believe. And Europe, there is still a perception that to be European, it's based on race. That it's unfortunate, but there is still that perception, and it is why many children, grandchildren of immigrants like myself don't feel part of European countries. It explains why so many Muslims from Europe went to join ISIS, because they felt isolated from your home country. And that's challenging, because for me growing up, I'm British. English is my first language. I've only ever lived in Britain until, a few years ago. Yet I never felt British. And I wasn't Pakistani. So there's this kind of, you feel you don't belong. And at a very human level, people are seeking belonging. So, and the time this was happening, the late 80s, the early 90s, you had multiple things happening. Satanic Verses, a book by Salman Rushdie, which many Muslims found offensive, was published, and that catapulted Muslims in Europe and the UK to the front page of newspapers where they'd never been. Muslims were seen almost in stereotypes as hardworking, they cared about their family, etc., etc. And now, you have Muslims burning books in the center of Bradford and London, and that brings a very visceral reaction from anybody. When book burnings are seen as a very dangerous path to go down. And then you had conflicts in Bosnia, and former Yugoslavia. So multiple things were happening. And growing up as a young Muslim, like many in my community, we didn't feel British. We weren't Pakistani. We didn't feel we belonged. And into that kind of mess, I would say, these extremist groups stepped in. You had radical groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir, al-Muhajirun, who came into the community and appealed to my generation directly, using something that resonated with us. When you grow up Muslim, especially my generation, my parents, my grandparents were so afraid that their kids born in the UK were going to abandon Islam. It became an integral part of your everyday. So it's something that resonated. So when these extremist groups started essentially looking to get people of my generation to kind of be part of what they were doing, it resonated. It's like, this is something I recognize. This gives me a sense of identity. But with their whole agenda it was nefarious. It wasn't to do something positive. It instead was divisive. And it's interesting. They didn't appeal to, my parents' generation or my grandparents, because they'd seen Muslim extremism in places like Pakistan and weren't interested. But for somebody like me, it resonated because it was empowering. It was talking about Islam in plain English. And it was giving me a reason or an excuse for why I was feeling the way I was feeling, feeling isolated, feeling that you don't belong. And these groups painted it in the idea that, in simplest terms, the West is at war with Islam. And simply by being Muslim, I am in this conflict, and that's why there are so many unequal things happening in our community. And look, the community I grew up in had the same issues every new immigrant community faces: issues with literacy, skilled labor, all these things. that, I could talk about the Polish community in the UK that came in the last 5 years. They've gone through the same process. But these issues were painted in a lens of this is happening because you're Muslim and you're a victim of Western society. And that's dangerous because when you believe you're a victim and you're not, you have no way to address the problem. And thus you get into the spiral of being angry and hateful and wanting some sort of recompense, but who do you address these problems to? But again, I wasn't a full-blown extremist. I was leaning and finding a message which resonated. And one of the interesting things, and it's particularly relevant now because of social media, so this is prior to the days of social media, the use of powerful imagery to manipulate is so potent. I can think back to the 1990s, and people would hand out images of dead children, images of people with limbs missing, with captions such as, this is happening in Palestine, help your Muslim brothers and sisters, this is what America is doing in Iraq or the Middle East, etc., etc. And so, because here's the thing with that sort of imagery, it's targeted, obviously, but it causes a response which is emotive, which makes sense. There's nothing wrong with that, because if I, for example, put on the screen an image of a dead child, it's going to hit a very emotive part of your nervous system, of your brain, and you're going to be shocked, you're going to be horrified, because we can all agree children shouldn't be dying or being killed. It doesn't matter who the kid is. But then what these groups do is they then paint a story around it, which 9 out of 10 times isn't based on truth. But it causes this circle of anger and frustration for the person viewing it, and it just makes you more susceptible to their message and their kind of subtle brainwashing. But what the tipping point for me of all these things was, I went to Pakistan to visit family in 2000, and it was on that trip the first time I'd come face to face with an actual terrorist organization. That organization was Lashkar-e-Taiba, who are a Pakistani-based terror organization who gained notoriety in the West for the attacks in Mumbai, in India. So I saw this group, and their propaganda and their kind of fighters and all these things, and it appealed. And while their message was incredibly extreme, it appealed because from my lens, I was a victim and these guys were the solution. They were fighting back, which is interesting because ultimately these groups caused the issue. They caused this idea that this is a problem and to present themselves as a solution. So it was empowering and it resonated. And I was like, okay. So when I went back to the UK, I started looking more into Lashkar-e-Taiba and groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba who believe in a very extreme and narrow interpretation of Islam. And it was very simple. And look, there are things with my grandparents, the Islam they taught us, which was very much, we do this because our grandparents did it. There wasn't this is why we do it by the book. And that's something that many people in my generation now wanted. And with these certain more radical streams of Islam, it was very black and white. And it painted the world in this is right, this is wrong, this is the truth, and everyone else is wrong. And that included other Muslims. If you didn't believe what, groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba believed, you weren't a true Muslim. And ultimately, what really jumped out as I read a lot of these extremist books written by extremist leaders was everything came down to the same issue, that the problem ultimately is the Jews. The Jews are the biggest problem and they are behind all the world's evil. And for me, I was coming at this from years of hearing all these negative things about Jews, all these anti-Semitic things, so it just made sense. So it's interesting because 9/11 was a major kind of factor for me in terms of kind of tipping that over the ledge, because while I'd gone down this kind of path, there was I don't want to say a stop point. I don't know how I describe it, to be honest. But when 9/11 happened, I crossed a red line because, thousands of innocent people had been murdered in New York. And here I was justifying the attacks. I wasn't looking at it from this empathetic, like, people have been murdered. I was justifying the attacks and going, well, this happened because America supported Israel. This happened because of American foreign policy. And that was a dangerous line to cross. And I crossed it without even noticing it. And then when I went off to college, I was already becoming very extreme, and I got involved with these anti-Israel groups, and that's what they are. Look, I use that term very intentionally. These groups, no matter how they brand themselves on college campuses today, and I still speak on college campuses, they may call themselves Students for Justice for this, or Students for Palestinian Rights. Ultimately, the reality is this: when Palestinians are being oppressed by Hamas, by other Arab governments, by the Palestinian Authority, completely silent. But when Israel is involved, they're very vocal and want to boycott Israel and do all these things. It's not about the Palestinians. It's about isolating and demonizing Israel. And that's the reality. And the way these groups and organizations, which I was a part of at one time, treated almost like a soccer game with, wearing the scarves and the T-shirts and buttons. It's pretty disgusting, if you ask me, because they care very little for actual human rights for the ordinary Palestinian. They completely don't care, to be honest. But I got to a point while I was at college where, I'm attending events, I'm holding events, we're handing out anti-Semitic flyers, because look, for me, it's very clear. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And people have gone, no, that's not true. But it's really simple. Zionism is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. If you have a problem with that, you have a problem with the idea of Jewish liberation, a Jewish homeland. And when that's the only idea of a nation state or a national homeland you have a problem with, it's singling out one group. It's literally the textbook definition of anti-Semitism. But yeah, so I got to this point where I was like, okay, I'm doing all these things. The only thing that really makes a difference is violence. Terrorism works. That's what I believe. So I started making plans to go back to Pakistan, to go to a terrorist training camp. And thankfully that didn't happen, because this would be a very strange conversation right now. On one of the, so it was a process. And it started when I picked up the book, The Case for Israel. I saw it in a bookstore. I was like, this is ridiculous. Who would write this book? Because like I said, when you believe something extreme or you become kind of radical, you surround yourself with things which echo your message. So I thought, I'll read it, buy it, and it will just validate what I already believe. It will make me, I will see how wrong they are and how right I am. And as I read the book, it brought up points that I'd never considered or even knew were real. The Jewish people have had a presence in the Holy Land for thousands of years. The Jewish people face Jerusalem to pray, and it talks about Israel today, democracy, all these things. So I was like, these are lies. This is absurd. I don't believe this. So I start researching a little bit more because I wanted to prove myself right. I've made a decision on how I want to go forward. I made a decision that this, extremism, radicalism is the way forward. So I need to just double check that that's the way to go. So I start researching, and 2 years go by because look, when you believe something to the point of I'm willing to kill people for this, you don't read one book and be like, okay, I'm done. I changed my mind. It doesn't work like that. And in those 2 years, my life was changing a lot because I was kind of withdrawn from the groups I was involved in, and I was kind of like suffering from depression, I guess, because the two things weren't coexisting, what I believe and what is reality, which I'm seeing like as I read more and more just general books. So ultimately I had to take, in my mind, very like decisive action. So I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll go to Israel. I'll go see it for myself. It's going to be awful. I know that, so I'll go see it. So 2007, I go to Israel for the first time. I've never traveled alone prior to this. And in the UK, we have the Home Office, which is like the State Department who issue travel advice. And travel advice for Israel was, be honest, because Israel has unique security challenges. So I fly to Tel Aviv. I'm at the airport. I go to passport control, and they ask, what is the purpose of your visit? So I was real honest. I was like, look, kind of anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. Not sure right now. So I thought I'd come and see it for myself. And that's how you end up spending 8 hours in airport security. So kind of my own fault. Okay, I can accept that. So here's the thing. Look, 8 hours is a long time. But it wasn't a bad experience. And honestly, I say that was my first, although the security officer was male, that was my first Jewish mother experience, because it went from, where are you planning to go? Where were you born? To would you like something to eat? Let me get you a coffee. So it was an interesting experience. But eventually, after 8 hours, I was able to go. And like I said, it wasn't a bad experience. It was, it was a long time. Sorry about that. But it wasn't a bad experience. So eventually I kind of leave the airport and go into Israel proper. And I guess what was interesting for me was the reality completely contradicted everything I'd ever seen or believed. Because I believed Israel was an apartheid state. Like, genuinely, I was expecting to see Arab-only supermarkets and things. And it's just not the case. I'm seeing Christians, Jews, Muslims, Druze, and I made an effort to speak to people. I spoke to people from all sorts of backgrounds. I spoke to Jews who'd come to Israel from Guatemala and even China. And for me, it was like, who knew there were Jews in Guatemala? Like, for me, I had this idea that Jews are white. They all came from Europe. They're all white. So that was, it was a lot to take in. And just even speaking to Arab Israelis, they're very honest. They went, look, not everything is perfect, but we're safer and more protected and have more freedoms here than a lot of the Arab world. And again, that was really challenging to hear for me, because I had my own narrative. And look, what was really the turning point, because I'm experienced with all of this, but still I can't make that jump from this is the truth, even though I'm seeing and hearing it. And it was at the Western Wall. So I went to the Western Wall, like a tourist, not sure what to do. I'm at the Western Wall. This guy next to me has his hand on the wall. And that's another thing. Going to the Western Wall, I wasn't sure if it was kind of like, you have to be Jewish, I don't know how it works, because I'd been to Saudi Arabia, and the holy sites in Saudi Arabia are off limits to non-Muslims. So no such issues at the Western Wall. So I go, and the guy next to me has his hand on the wall. So I'm like, I can do that. That's simple enough. And afterwards, my forehead's against the Western Wall. And look, it's super cliche, and I've told this story many times, but this is reality. It really was like a moment of clarity, where I was kind of able to shut out the external noises and just the even internal dialogue and go, okay, take a step back here. You're in Jerusalem. You're in the capital of Israel. You're in a Jewish state. You've met people from all backgrounds. And these are people you hated. These are people that you plausibly wanted to kill. These are people that when buses were being blown up in the Second Intifada, you thought they deserved it. And that was a real kind of moment where I was like, what has happened to you? Like, how have you completely lost your moral compass? Like, how does that even happen? But instead of kind of dwelling on that and being kind of like wallowing in self-pity, which I don't think helps anything, I was like, okay, but look at the reality. You're in Jerusalem, at the Western Wall, the flag of Israel with the blue Star of David. And what really kind of jumped out to me was I thought, okay, no matter what happens, what I've thought about Israel, I've been wrong. I am wrong. No matter what happens, it's not about politics. It's not about religion. It's about something much greater. And the two things that stood out were one, that if there was an Israel in 1930, 6 million Jews would not have perished in Europe. I genuinely believe that. And I say that knowing that Israel is not a result of the Holocaust. Simply not. If you believe that, you have no knowledge of Jewish history. And the other thing was, I realized that Israel represented the preservation and the continuation of the single greatest story in human history, the story of the Jewish people. Without the Jewish people, we have no Islam, we have no Christianity. Without the Jewish people, we don't have some of the tenets that modern free societies are based on, the ideas of justice and caring for the sick and weak, because these are ultimately Jewish values. You look at the empires of old, Sparta, Greece, it wasn't about caring for the most vulnerable, it was about survival of the fittest. It was about education being a privilege, not a right. And it's these Jewish values taught by the Hebrew prophets, which has changed the face of the world for the better. And it was interesting to me, like coming away from that experience and deciding that I need to learn more and spending weeks in Israel, 2.5 weeks, going to the Palestinian territories. Also, I realized, one, how wrong I'd got it, and two, now that I had a responsibility. So I went back to the UK. I had two choices. I could go, I've seen, I got it wrong, life goes on and I'm done. Or I can tell people about what I experienced and go, guys, look, what we believe is wrong. And honestly, I didn't think it was anything controversial. There was not one part of me thought, me speaking to my old friends, even though radicalized, whatever, this is not controversial. This is, it's not a big deal. So I was wrong. Shock horror. And there was a lot of hostility. And look, we are, let me see now, 13 years. 13 years a few months ago since the first time I visited Israel. I've been to Israel many times since then. I work for Christians United for Israel today as a Middle East analyst. And look, in those 13 years, a lot has happened. I left the UK because it got difficult. It's difficult to grow up in a neighborhood, grow up in a situation, and then find the very kind of neighborhood and area that you grow up in, you're no longer welcome. It's difficult getting death threats regularly. It's difficult finding yourself becoming more isolated with your family and community. So I moved to Canada and then eventually the United States through marriage because my wife refused to live in a place where it snows 8 months of the year. And look, with everything that's happened, continues to happen. I speak at campuses. I occasionally get death threats from people who refuse to use spell check. It's sad, like it's a free app. Come on. I don't regret the choice I've made. Like I've done the right thing because one, I believe that no matter what we do or what we believe, we are accountable for what we do. Now, be it to a higher power or be it to ourselves or our grandchildren or children, we're accountable for what we do. And two, the reality is this. When there is evil, when something's wrong, you have to speak out. You have a responsibility. Look, I don't know, how long my life is going to be, but I hope to leave this planet a better place than when, I was born. And look, I've made mistakes. Like there are things that I have said in the past in regards to Islam, which in hindsight, I believe were unfair. And I think that's the important thing. For me, you have to continue to grow. You have to continue to reevaluate what you're doing and what you're saying. And you have to believe and know that what you do makes a difference. You don't know, because it is, especially when we look at something like the Middle East or anti-Semitism, or we believe that we're one person, what can we do? Sometimes that's what it takes. It takes one person to speak up. It takes one person to say this isn't okay. And that can start something that can change the world. And even in your own circle, you don't know who you will influence by what you say and what impact that those seeds will have 10, 15, 20 years down the line. So with that, I want to wrap up and yeah, that's me done talking for now.
Thank you, Kazim. Thank you so much. I want to encourage people to actually, if you have any questions for him, just to write them on the chat, and then we will relay them and we'll ask them. While people write, if they have any questions, I have a question for you, because I remember the part of the story that was really the most amazing to me. Look, I have this, whenever I go to Israel and I get trapped at the airport for more than half an hour, I go absolutely crazy. Okay, this is me personally. I can't stand Israeli security. Like, they drive me crazy. So you were there for 8 hours. And I remember part of the story that they kept telling you they wanted to take you to places, right? And like the guys wanted to go with you, and you thought they were being nice to you. They really wanted to watch what you were doing. What was amazing to you is, like, how did they? I can't believe they let you in. I mean, if I would have been that guy, I would have not let you into Israel. I'm still shocked they let you in. So I don't know if that shocked you at all.
Honestly, thinking back now, it's like, it was a strange decision to make, like, from the security perspective. But we spoke a lot. We spoke about my background, what I was doing, where I planned to go. So I don't know. Maybe he was like, okay, anybody who turns up in Israel and goes, I'm kind of anti-Semitic, like, he's got bigger problems than, like. So maybe we'll be okay.
We have a very interesting question here, which actually touches on the subject of repentance, which is what we're doing tonight. And this begins the whole season of repentance for us. I mean, actually began a month ago. But somebody asks, how is the relationship with your family today? Right? Because one of the hardest things when you change your life and when you change what you think or you've been taught is to actually confront those people that you grew up with and knew some way, and now they know you as a different person. So how's your relationship to them, Kasim?
Not great. So I think the most challenging thing in my family has been, people if you disagree with me, that's fine. We can talk. I can relay my experience. You can still go, okay, I disagree. My issue has been with my family that they refuse to listen. They don't want to hear it, period. And that's been really challenging for me. With my family, my door's always open. I've gone past that stage of anger and frustration with them, because I did feel, like, being completely honest, there was a lot of hurt early on. I was like, I've not done anything wrong. Like, this is unfair. So I've gone past that stage. My door is always open. I've reached out to my family, and there has been very kind of small talk kind of conversation now and again via text. But in general, my extended family is non-existent. With my direct family, it's very minimal. With my dad, I have absolutely nothing to do with him at all. So yeah, that's where it stands today.
So there's a bunch of questions here. One of them is, when you were being radicalized and you went to Pakistan, which language did they use to radicalize you? What do they speak to you in English or Arabic or Pakistani or?
So it does a mixture. So initially, the radical messages you'd hear were more in Urdu, which is spoken mainly kind of in the Pakistani community, Urdu or Patwari, which is a dialect. But as other groups, these guys, I call them new radicalizing groups, which they weren't, but they were in my community in the 90s. They would have their materials in English. Like, English was the language of choice because we, like, being born in Britain, spoke English. So you'd catch, like, sermons in Urdu. It's interesting. And I've heard that, this is just, again, my personal experience, and I don't want to project this onto all communities. We had this kind of issue in my community where the head of the mosque would say one thing at interfaith meetings in English, but would say very different things to his congregation in Urdu. Wow. Which was hugely problematic, like, and look, this is a cleric in the UK who he has like an MBE from the Queen for, like, his interfaith work, but what he would say to the congregation in Urdu or behind closed doors was very different from the message that he was putting out. And he wasn't one of the radical extremist either. Like he wouldn't be considered as an extreme, but that was part of the issue. But yeah, a lot of it was in Urdu, but as things went on, a lot more literature and extremist material was available in English.
I'm going to combine two questions in one. Kasim, first, when you go to speak in college campuses, what is the reaction of the Palestinian students or the students that support the Palestinians to you? And second, what do you think? How do we stop that anti-Semitism on campuses? What do we have to do?
So in terms of reaction, it varies depending on what campus. Sometimes they just don't want you to speak and are gonna do whatever, protest, interrupt, etc., etc. And I'm always like, look, I don't care what questions you ask. You can ask any questions at all. Just hear me out. Because ultimately, look, I think dialogue is a good starting point. So yeah, it varies. And sometimes you do have good conversations and you're able to kind of reach a middle ground because you're not necessarily going to agree, but if you can find a common ground to start on, it's a positive. But in terms of anti-Semitism on campuses today, I think, and I it's very easy to say this, it has to be challenged. It can't be made okay. And I think that's one of the challenges where, look, Jewish students shouldn't have to go to college and feel that they have to, one, get their bachelor's degree and also be fighting every single day. Like, it's a horrible situation, but that is the reality. And it has to be fought, and it's not just a Jewish issue. Anti-Semitism is an evil, and it has to be challenged by everyone, and it has to be treated like racism, because it is. It's racism and bigotry, but sadly it's become acceptable, and you know, it can be repetitive, but it just has to keep being re-emphasized that this is not okay and this is unacceptable.
Kasim, somebody asks if you're afraid for your life or your safety.
No, not at all. I mean, honestly,
That's
there
good.
was a time when I was, then I'm like, you know what, like what happens, and yeah, I'm not really concerned.
Okay. Look, I know it's late where you are. You're in the East Coast. I know people don't know, but you're in Florida, and
Yes,
yeah,
I apologize. I'm in the hotel lobby at the moment because it has the best
I am
Wi-Fi.
so
So
grateful that you did this for us. I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining us tonight. And I know that there's a lot of people watching that when you were speaking, they're thinking of their children, right, and what's happening on their campus and their grandchildren. And look, thank you for the work you do. It's really tremendous work. And sometimes it's really important to hear all of this from a non-Jewish person because we get carried away with our own message. The most important message that I rescue from your story is that people do change and they have an opportunity to really, really turn their life around. The last question, I want to close it, but there's one more question that I want to ask you because if I don't ask you this question, this person I see every day, he'll never leave me alone. How do you view the recent Middle East peace initiatives that are happening right now? What do you think about them?
I think it's a great thing. I think it shows a new reality in the Middle East. I think a lot of this has to do with Iran and how the Gulf states view the threat that Iran poses. But I also think, on the one hand, the threat posed by Iran is being recognized by the Gulf states, but they also now realize that, hey, maybe Israel isn't our enemy. I mean, and that's definitely being realized because with the UAE and Bahrain, if you look at the normalization agreements, it's one thing to sign an agreement. You know, Israel has agreements with Egypt and Jordan, and they are cold pieces. Peace is still peace, which is great. But there seems to be genuine excitement in the United Arab Emirates amongst just general people and in Bahrain over these agreements. And I think it's an overdue step, but in the Middle East things take time, and I think this is hugely positive. And it also, unfortunately, and I understand why, even if I don't agree, the Palestinian issue has been almost a wedge for any progress or peace in the Middle East. And the problem is the Palestinian leadership have no desire for peace, unfortunately, because, you know, a peace for Abbas and a Palestinian state means now that he needs to run a state, and he can't have the levels of corruption and get away with it, and he's responsible. And look, if you treat somebody like a child and go, you don't have to have any responsibility, they're going to keep acting like a child. I mean, why would they? If somebody went, you don't have to pay any bills and you can do whatever, I'd be like, okay, cool. So I think it's a new reality in the Middle East. I think it's a very positive thing. I think it's a good thing, and I think it's very genuine, which I think can only be, a positive. And again, just to relate, like I said, when I was growing up, I grew up around anti-Semitism, not knowing anyone Jewish or Israeli. I'm sure there are so many people in the Middle East who, probably more so, and they actually have the opportunity to go to Israel. They can have Israelis visiting their countries. They're going to have Jewish people visiting their countries. And I think that's going to be massively impactful, because ultimately peace is made by people, not states. And people from these countries meeting each other, seeing that, look, they're essentially the same and have the same concerns and want to care for their kids and want peace and don't want all these things, is going to be hugely positive for the region.
Okay. Kasim, I want to thank you so much. I want to let you go to sleep. You look like you need a little bit of rest. But thank you so much for joining us tonight. And hopefully our paths will cross soon again, and we'll be able to catch up live and not through Zoom. Thank you so much for everything. And I want to wish you, wherever your life takes you, to have a lot of success.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. L'Shana Tova to everybody. Have a wonderful beginning of a new year. Hopefully this will be a great year, abandoning all of the horrible things of the past year. We really need a good start here, a fresh start. So Shana Tova u'metuka to everyone. Where's Rabbi Tektil? I don't know. He's there somewhere. I just lost him on the, I don't see him on my screen, but.
Yes, I'm here. I just
there you
want to say Shana Tova to everyone, and thank you for joining us. I want to thank Rabbi Goodman for putting this together. And I think it's really, for me, it's a wonderful way to start this week as we get ready for Rosh Hashanah, to keep this idea in mind. It's really this message of, for me, it was just a message of hope, right? That's really what it's all about. So I want to thank Kasim and thank everyone for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night, and Shana Tova. Shana Tova.